Have you ever sat across from someone you love and felt like a stranger, not because of a fight, not because of a betrayal, but because something unspoken has changed? It's one of the quietest heartbreaks in the world, when love doesn't explode. It simply fades, no dramatic arguments, no shouting, no final door slammed shut, just silence, the same morning coffee, but without warmth in the good morning. The same shared bed, but with miles of silence between two backs turned, and the hardest part, most of the time, we don't even notice when it begins, because everything looks the same on the outside, the routines, the conversations, even the small laughs at familiar jokes. But something invisible shifts beneath the surface. Love, you see, rarely leaves in a storm, it leaves like autumn, one leaf at a time. Quiet. Inevitable. Easy to ignore. Until all the color is gone, and when it fades, it doesn't feel like a choice, it feels like loss, but with no one to blame, not them, not you, just change. People don't stop showing love because they've turned cruel, they stop because something inside has shifted, and often, they don't know why either. It's not about malice, it's about emotional gravity, how some hearts grow apart, even while hands remain held, and that's when the suffering begins, not from the change itself, but from our resistance to it. We ask ourselves, what did I do wrong? Why can't they just feel what they used to feel? Can I bring it back? We cling. We try harder. We offer more, but sometimes, what's missing isn't something that can be replaced, it's something that's no longer there. Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic emperor who ruled an empire but struggled deeply with loss, once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Let that sink in. You can't control whether someone's feelings change, but you can control how you respond to that change. We suffer most when we fight reality, when we hold on to a chapter that's trying to close, but here's the hard truth, and also the liberating one. Sometimes, love fades, and no one is at fault, so how do we know when it's happening? That's what this video is about, because while love can vanish silently, there are two clear but subtle signs that reveal the truth. If you're willing to see them, we'll explore those signs in a moment. But first, ask yourself, are you feeling emotionally alone? Even when you're together, have the words "I love you" become routine, or worse, absent? Do you find yourself hoping for affection, instead of receiving it naturally? These questions aren't here to cause fear, they're here to shine a light, gently, on what we often ignore until it's too late. Love fading doesn't mean failure. Sometimes, it means growth, sometimes, it means letting go, not of the person, but of the illusion that nothing changes. This is not a story of despair, it's a story of awareness, because when you see things clearly, you stop chasing what's gone, and start building something new, even if it's just within yourself. Let's begin. In a quiet village surrounded by forests and fields, there lived a man named Elias. He wasn't a man of status, nor of wealth, he was a farmer, humble, kind, devoted. His days were simple, and his heart anchored to one thing, his love for his wife, Lyanna. For years, they shared a life many would envy, morning coffees under the rising sun, laughter over small, silly things, shared silences that once felt peaceful, not heavy, but over time, something shifted. It didn't come with shouting matches or slammed doors, there were no cruel words, no betrayals, just a subtle distance. Lyanna became quieter, not cold, but far away. Somehow, her eyes didn't meet his as often, her laughter, once vibrant, grew rare. She was still there, but not present. Elias tried everything he knew. He cooked her favorite meals, he brought home wildflowers like he used to, he asked gentle questions, but got soft smiles and fewer answers. It was as if love had pulled back, not in anger, but like a tide, slipping away quietly. And in that silence, Elias began to ache, not from rejection, but from not understanding. So one day, Elias set out to find someone the villagers spoke of only in whispers, a figure known as the Watcher. They said he lived alone, on the edge of the woods, that he spoke little, but saw deeply, that when people were lost, he didn't give directions, he gave clarity. Elias found him sitting by a fire. An old man, with eyes like still water, he explained. Everything, about Lyanna, about the silence, about how it hurt without reason, and after a long pause, the watcher said only this: love fades like autumn leaves, not in rage, but in rhythm. Quietly. Naturally. Elias stared at him, unsure, so the watcher continued. Do not force clarity from someone unsure of their own heart. If you chase the wind, you'll only grow tired. And then, perhaps sensing the question Elias was too afraid to ask, he added, when the signs appear. You will not need to ask, you will already know. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He thought about the leaves, how they fall without noise, not because the tree is angry, but because the season has changed. He realized he had spent so much time trying to fix what had no name, trying to solve something that may not be broken, just transformed. Love, like all living things, breathes. It grows, it withers, it changes shape. Sometimes, it returns in a new season, sometimes, it does not. Elias didn't get a clear answer from Lyanna that day, but he began to understand something deeper, that we cannot make someone feel what they no longer feel, and more importantly, we should not need to, because love, when real, doesn't have to be chased. It shows itself, in presence, in effort, in emotional honesty. If it fades, it's not always a tragedy, it's a transition, and maybe even a quiet invitation to grow into something new. If you're in a place like Elias, sensing the quiet, feeling the shift, maybe what you need isn't an answer from them, but stillness within yourself, because clarity doesn't always come in words. Sometimes, it comes in silence, in watching, in accepting, and in trusting that what fades, frees space for what's meant to stay. Sometimes, love doesn't leave with a door slam, it doesn't scream, it doesn't shatter, it simply stops knocking. Elias noticed it on a Tuesday, not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. Lyanna still got up early, she still made tea, folded the laundry, watered the plants, but something was missing, something you can't see, but feel. They still spoke. Technically, but their conversations had become shallow, functional. Did you feed the chickens? What time is the market? Did the neighbor return the shovel? Gone were the midnight talks about dreams, fears, regrets. Gone was the sparkle when she told him about something that made her soul light up. It wasn't coldness that hurt Elias, it was the absence of warmth. There's a moment in love when you realize, you are no longer being invited in, not because you knocked too loudly, not because you did anything wrong, but simply because they've closed the gate. And that's what the watcher had once told Elias: each of us has a garden inside, a private place where our thoughts, hopes, and vulnerabilities grow. When we love someone, we give them a key, we say, come in. This is who I am. But when love begins to fade, that gate doesn't slam shut, it closes slowly. Quietly, not with anger, but with distance. It wasn't the silence that broke Elias, it was what the silence meant. He was no longer someone Lyanna turned to with the contents of her heart. He could sense she was thinking, feeling, but choosing to keep it inside, and that's when the ache begins, not because someone has left, but because they've stopped arriving. Elias asked, why does it hurt so much when they stop sharing? The watcher looked at him and replied, because we believe love means forever access, we expect the door to stay open, no matter how the weather changes. Then he added something Elias never forgot: the pain doesn't come from their silence, it comes from your belief that they should still be speaking to you. That night, Elias sat alone, no more pretending. No more trying to relight what wouldn't spark, and instead of forcing warmth, he began to observe reality. This was the first true sign that love was changing. She was no longer letting him into her inner world. It didn't make her cruel, it didn't make him unworthy, it just meant the season had shifted. How often do we do this? Hold on to people who've already let go, not out of malice, but out of quiet evolution. We think if we say the right thing, do the right thing, love hard enough, they'll come back to that place where we used to meet, but here's the truth, you cannot force someone to give you their heart, if they've already placed it somewhere else. The Stoics taught us something powerful: do not mourn what was never fully yours to control. You can offer your heart, you can show up with presence and intention, but when the gate closes, when they stop inviting you in, you must not bang on the door. You must not beg to be let back in. You walk away, not in rage, not in sorrow, but in quiet dignity, because real strength is knowing when the silence is not a pause, but a goodbye, if someone no longer shares their soul with you. That is not your failure, it is simply the moment when love asks to be released, so that something truer can begin within yourself. There are moments in love when nothing is said, but everything is understood. Elias didn't discover it through words, not through shouting or silence, but through something far more subtle, a shift in attention. As they walked through the village market, he noticed where her eyes went, not toward the vegetables or the merchants, but toward others, a couple holding hands, laughing as if the world around them didn't exist, a man adjusting his wife's scarf, his gesture small, yet full of devotion, and then Lioness spoke, softly, not with bitterness, not with accusation, but with observations that pierced deeper than silence. She always looks so composed. He really listens to her. They seem so connected. She wasn't trying to hurt him. She wasn't even aware of the wound her words created, but Elias felt it, the quiet comparisons, the subtle measuring, and he knew, in that moment, he was no longer just being seen, he was being evaluated. That night, Elias returned to the edge of the woods, to the man villagers called the Watcher. He didn't speak of anger or betrayal, just of this quiet ache, the kind that comes when love remains physically close, but emotionally begins to drift. I feel like I'm not enough anymore, Elias confessed, like she's seeing something in others that she no longer sees in me. The Watcher listened, his gaze steady, and then he shared a story. There was once a man who sculpted a statue of his wife. Not out of resentment, but love. He captured every detail, her smile, her stance, her spark, but over time, he began to change the sculpture. He gave her brighter eyes, a gentler voice, a more graceful laugh. None of it came from hate, but from admiration of others, and comparison he never voiced. By the end, the sculpture was perfect, but it wasn't her, it was a fantasy, a stranger, a ghost crafted from dissatisfaction. And then the Watcher paused before saying, "This is what comparison does to love, it slowly erodes connection and replaces it with correction. A partner becomes a project, a soul becomes a checklist." Elias sat with those words, watching the fire crackle. He thought about Lioness, about the woman who once looked at him like he was home, and how now, her eyes wandered to different horizons. He didn't blame her, and strangely, he didn't blame himself either, because sometimes, love shifts, not because someone failed, but because someone drifted. The Stoics warned us, do not tie your self-worth to the shifting gaze of others. Because when you do, you become a shadow, always trying to morph into the reflection someone wants, while slowly abandoning who you truly are. That night, Elias didn't ask Lioness, "Do you still love me?" He already knew the answer, not in her voice, but in what her silence no longer shared. In that moment, Elias made a quiet, powerful choice. He would stop trying to become the man she compared him to, and return to the man he had always been, steady, present, enough. Because the truth is this, you don't lose your value when someone stops admiring you, you only feel lost when you allow their drifting gaze to define your reflection. If you're sensing the shift, if the comparisons have begun, if admiration has turned into suggestion, if silence has become more telling than words, don't chase validation, don't shrink to fit a fantasy, and most of all, don't compete with ghosts, because true love doesn't ask you to become someone else. It sees you, as you are, and chooses you anyway. When someone stops letting you into their heart, it is not your failure, it is their quiet farewell. And in that silence, you are not being abandoned, you are being redirected, back to yourself. When love begins to fade, the most painful part isn't the arguments, it's not the shouting, the slammed doors, or even the tearful goodbyes, it's the silence, and the quiet question it leaves behind, what do I do now? Elias stood there one autumn afternoon, watching the wind carry leaves across the yard. Inside, Lionel was only a few steps away. The kettle hissed softly. A cup clicked gently against the table. The house was calm. Familiar, but something had shifted. There were no longer glances that reached across the room, no soft questions like "How was your day?" or "Do you remember when?" Just silence, dense, polite, and hollow, and in that stillness, Elias realized something: love doesn't leave with thunder, it dissolves like mist, softly. Silently. And without warning, that night, Elias went back to see the watcher, the old man who had listened so many times before, but this time. There were no tears, no desperate theories. No rehearsed speeches, just one honest question: what do I do, when the person I love no longer feels like home? The watcher looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "You cannot chase the wind, and you cannot force a leaf to cling to a branch when autumn has arrived. There is always a moment, a turning point in every relationship, when the heart knows, this chapter is closing, but the mind resists. We overthink, we reanalyze every detail, we write long messages we never send, imagining they might change everything. We cling, not to what is, but to what once was. But here's a truth that few dare say out loud: if someone has already left you emotionally, your words cannot reach them, not because they're cruel, but because they've moved on, not physically, perhaps, but spiritually. Emotionally. They've stepped into another room, and quietly closed the door behind them. The next morning, Elias walked through the garden. The trees had shed their leaves, not in failure, but in season. He sat down, not to cry, but to face the truth, and he whispered to himself, "I loved you, but I will not lose myself trying to hold on to someone who's already gone." The watcher had said something once, a line Elias only now understood: sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is nothing at all. No explaining, no chasing, no begging, just letting them go, with grace, with gratitude, with love still in your heart, but not at the cost of your soul. This isn't weakness, it's not defeat, it's acceptance, and from acceptance, healing begins, because if someone no longer chooses to share their heart with you, the real question is no longer, how do I win them back? But rather, am I holding on to them? Or holding myself back? Don't beg spring to return when autumn is already here. Don't ask a falling leaf to defy the wind. Even the trees understand, there is beauty in letting go. The Stoics taught that peace comes, not from control, but from surrendering what we cannot hold. Epictetus wrote, freedom comes from letting go of what is outside your control. And that includes hearts that no longer beat for you. True love never needs to be chased, and real peace, it begins the moment you stop knocking on a door that's already closed, and start returning home, to yourself. So if you find yourself in this moment, watching the leaves fall, feeling the silence grow louder, remember this: let them go, if they must. Let yourself grow, because you must. Because you were never meant to shrink for someone who forgot how to hold you. You were meant to stand tall, like the tree in autumn, shedding what no longer serves, but rooted deeper than ever before. Elias never came back bitter. He didn't rage, he didn't demand explanations, he didn't chase closure that would never come. He chose something far more powerful. He accepted what was, and in that quiet surrender, he began to live differently, not out of grief, but out of wisdom. There was no dramatic ending, no final message that tied the story together, no last embrace under the rain, no moment where it all suddenly made sense. And maybe, that's exactly the point, because peace doesn't always come from resolution. Sometimes, it comes from release, from letting go of the question, will they ever come back? And instead asking, how do I return to myself? The Stoics remind us, we do not own love, we simply get to experience it while it lasts. But we fight that truth. Don't we? We try to fix what's fading, to hold on tighter, to say the right thing, hoping it might rewind time. but love doesn't always die with a thunderclap, sometimes it ends in a whisper, a glance that no longer lingers, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes, a silence that stretches longer than any goodbye ever could, and when that silence becomes louder than the words, when their presence feels heavier than their absence, the most dignified thing we can do is to let go, with grace, because chasing someone who has already left you emotionally is like begging the leaves not to fall when autumn comes. It won't work. And it's not meant. 2. Elias didn't need closure from Lyanna, he didn't need an explanation, he didn't need to hear what changed, he needed only one thing, a new way of being, a life not built on someone else's presence, but on his own peace, his own strength, his own return to himself. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once wrote, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life, and freedom comes from letting go of what is outside your control." You can't control whether they choose you, you can't force someone to stay, but you can choose not to shrink for their attention, not to twist yourself into a version they might still love. You don't need to be more lovable, more perfect, more agreeable, you need to be you. Have you felt it too, the slow drift, not out of cruelty, but quiet disconnection? It's not always your fault. Sometimes love fades not because something went wrong, but because time moved on, because people grow, sometimes in different directions. This isn't a story of blame, it's a mirror, to show you what's real. Yes, your pain is valid, but so is your power. You don't need their return to feel whole again. You only need to stop waiting, because healing doesn't come from hiding, it comes from honest moments, like this one. So if you find yourself holding on to someone who has long since let go of you, ask yourself, am I waiting for them, or am I abandoning myself? Don't become a ghost in your own life, don't pause your joy, in hopes of an answer that may never come. Let them go, if they must, let yourself grow, because you must, because real love never demands to be chased, and real peace, it doesn't come when they return, it begins when you return to yourself. If you've been through something like this, if you've felt the slow ache of someone fading away without a word, your story matters, share it. In the comments, in your journal, with someone who understands, because somewhere out there, someone is silently breaking. And your truth might be the light they need to keep going. Let go, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring for yourself. Your next chapter isn't waiting for their return, it's waiting for you, sometimes. Love doesn't die with a bang, it doesn't end in a fight, it doesn't break like glass, it simply fades, quietly, slowly, like a sunset no one noticed. Until darkness filled the room, if you've ever felt it, the shift, the silence, the slow drift, you know what I mean. You can't always explain it, but you can feel it, and once you do, nothing is ever quite the same. The first sign that love is fading, they stop letting you into their inner world. Not because they hate you, not because they've betrayed you, but because something inside has quietly shut the door. You still talk. Technically, but it's surface level now. Did you walk the dog? What's for dinner? Did you pay the bill? Gone are the late night conversations, gone are the questions that mattered. What are you afraid of lately? What's been on your mind? Do you still believe in us? And the most painful part, it doesn't happen all at once, it fades so slowly you don't notice until the connection is gone. The Watcher once said, each of us has a garden inside, a private space for our dreams, fears, and truths. When we love someone, we hand them the key. But when love fades, the gate doesn't slam shut, it simply stops opening, and you find yourself locked out of a heart you once called home. The second sign, they begin to compare you. Silently. Subtly, you catch it in the way their eyes linger on others, in their tone when they admire someone else's passion, style, or presence. She's so confident. He really listens to her. They seem so in sync. They're not accusing you, they're not asking you to change, but something in you knows, they've begun measuring, and you're no longer enough in their eyes. The Watcher once told a story. There was a man who sculpted a statue of his wife. At first, he captured her perfectly, but over time, He started changing small things, adding someone else's eyes, another woman's laughter, a different smile, until one day, the statue standing before him, was no longer his wife, it was a fantasy, a stranger built from comparisons. That's what comparison does, it turns love into performance, connection into correction, and you, into someone you were never meant to be. So what do you do, when you see these signs, when love becomes quiet, distant, unspoken? The Stoics teach us, you do not own love. You only experience it while it stays. And when it begins to fade, not with cruelty, but with calm indifference. The most powerful thing you can do is, let it go, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring. For yourself, you don't need their apology to heal, you don't need closure to move on, you don't need them to return to feel whole again. What you need is to stop standing outside a closed gate, waiting to be invited back in. Love is not a door you should have to knock on forever. Real love lets you in, without you begging for access. Have you felt it? The shift in their tone, the comparison in their compliments. The silence that used to be filled with wonder, now filled with distance. If so, let me tell you this, you're not imagining it. And no, you're not too sensitive, you're just becoming aware, and awareness is the first step toward freedom. You cannot force someone to share their heart with you, you cannot fight for a place that they no longer want you to occupy, you cannot compete with a version of yourself they created in their mind. But you can do this, you can choose you can reclaim your dignity, you can grieve, quietly, honestly, and then begin again. Because love, when it's real, does not need to be chased, and peace, when it's ready, does not arrive through someone else's return, but through your own. So if you're feeling the signs, if the gate is closed, if the statue no longer resembles you, don't stay out of habit, don't chase out of fear, don't lose yourself trying to win back someone who's already emotionally gone. Instead, let go, not in bitterness, not in sorrow, but in clarity, in strength, in self-respect, because love may fade, but your worth, it never does.